Good morning to you all. This lecture aims at helping you understand the United States, its history, and how this country works, and as well the current issue it is facing. We'll first discuss the major values and principles of the country, and then we'll see how they were often contradicted. The outline will be twofold. First, the most obvious US values, with explanations on the Declaration of Independence, the US Constitution, and finally, E pluribus unum, the motto explaining unity and multiculturalism. The second moment of this lecture will be devoted of when the values meet reality. First, how the US is a land of contradictions, and finally, the debate over Confederate statues and monuments that took place over the summer 2020. First, let's travel back in time and start with a very famous date, the 4th of July 1776. Why is this date essential? It is the date of the Declaration of Independence. So before this date, the US was not a country. It was a group of 13 colonies located in America, and these colonies belonged to Great Britain. So before the 4th of July 1776, people who lived in America were British subjects, and for about 15 years, the relationship between Great Britain and the American colonies had become rather hostile or rather antagonistic. Indeed, the people in America considered Great Britain took inappropriate decisions concerning the colonies because the British King and Parliament ruled the colonies from the other side of the Atlantic, and they had limited knowledge about the real life of the colonies. All the decisions regarding the colonies were taken in London at the Westminster Parliament by the people who had never been to America. As a result, many American colonists resented Great Britain, so they held a grudge against Great Britain for taking advantage of the colonies by taxing these colonies, for example, taxes on paper documents, on manufactured objects, or taxes on sugar. So the colonies were taxed, but they were not given proper representation in the British Parliament. And the motto of this discontent was no taxation without representation. No taxation without representation. Consequently, Great Britain and its American colonies started a war. It was called the Revolutionary War or the Independence War. So the Revolutionary War or the Independence War. And on the 4th of July 1776, the representatives of the American colonies presented a formal declaration establishing the independence of the United States from Great Britain. In other words, they transformed the colonies into an independent country with this famous declaration. Let's read the most famous words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these words help us understand the values that are important for Americans. All men are created equal emphasizes equality, equal opportunities, fairness, justice. Liberty is the expression of freedom, independence. The pursuit of happiness stresses a sense of enterprise, the initiative to lead a happy, joyful, and fulfilling life. And finally, endowed by their creator, reveals the presence and authority of God in American culture. By the way, it is important to remember that the 13 original colonies are presented on the American flag. The US flag is also called the Old Glory or the Star Spangled Banner. And the 13 stripes on that flag stand for the 13 colonies, whereas the 50 stars represent the 50 states. So the number of stars increases as the number of states rises. So this flag represents the strong interconnection between the past and the present of the United States, and how the origins of the country inspire its future. So its colors are very important as well. White signifies purity, innocence. Red signifies bravery. And blue means vigilance, perseverance, and justice. Now let's have a look at the US Constitution in order to understand American values and mentality. So the US Constitution is crucial because it serves as the supreme law to organize the country, namely the way the country is governed and what are the rights of the citizen. So it's the supreme law of the country. It explains how the country is governed and what are the rights of the citizen. And it came into effect in 1789. So the preamble of the Constitution reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty." It asserts ideals similar to those of the Declaration of Independence. First, justice and freedom. Remember that the First Amendment to the US Constitution is about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to assemble, the right to petition the government to redress grievance. Second, the general welfare underlines the need for equality, the need of a prosperity for all. And also, the Constitution introduces other notions such as unity, togetherness, protection, and defense. So the first words of the preamble, "we, the people," are essential because they illustrate the way the United States wants to be a democracy in which the real source of the power is the people, in other words, the population. So the US is a democracy for the people and by the people. The government gets all its powers from all the citizens of the United States of America. And the inclusive phrase, "we the people," is now interpreted as the integration of all American citizens of any race or gender, and it is supposed to disregard discrimination. I want you to note that in two speeches by Barack Obama and Donald Trump, on page 6 and 7 in the brochure, you've got numerous references to the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution. Now let's move on to the notion e pluribus unum. The very name of the country, the United States, underlines the necessity to be unified, to be a union. The country supports a strong sense of cohesion and harmony. So the desire to stand or to come together, stand together or come together, is also expressed in the motto of the country, e pluribus unum, which means out of many, one, or one out of many. So e pluribus unum can be paraphrased as such: out of diversity comes unity. The US claims that embracing the difference and individuality of each of its citizens makes the country richer and more unified. And the strength of the US is the diversity of its people. So it's people, immigrants coming from all over the world for centuries, and there is a strong, powerful connection between American people. For example, during very dark episodes of US history, like the Second World War or the terrorist attacks of 9/11 on the World Trade Center, the slogan "United we stand" was often used to underline the inseparability of American people when faced with a crisis. So the idea of inseparability of American people when faced with a crisis. Well, let's spend a few minutes on the issue of the plurality of the United States. As I said, the US is a country of immigrants because everyone in America is an immigrant. So everyone in America is an immigrant except for the Native Americans, so except for the Indians, the Native Americans. And the US praises this multiculturalism. So the country is often described as a salad bowl because it integrates the heterogeneity of its population. And it's also a salad bowl because it favors ethnic diversity rather than imposes cultural assimilation of one single model. So remember this notion, multiculturalism. Well, I would like to take the example of two artistic campaigns that were launched in 2017 and 2018. So the first campaign is entitled We the People. So this campaign was launched by Shepard Fairey, and it was a way to defend groups that were largely attacked by Donald Trump during his presidential campaign. So Fairey referred to the preamble of the US Constitution in order to defend Muslims, Latinos, African Americans, and women. And he really celebrates the multicultural identity of America, the undeniable role of ethnic minorities. Also, he emphasizes the fact that minorities belong to the American population, and this campaign, the We the People campaign, was an attack against white supremacism, and also an attack against male-dominated society because it proudly featured women belonging to ethnic and religious minority. The second interesting campaign follows the same initiative. So a campaign from 2018 entitled We the Future. And this campaign showcased 10 young leaders from every ethnic background. Leaders fighting for youth vote, criminal justice reform, queer justice, immigration justice, preventing gun violence, climate justice, etc., etc. Now let's move on to the second moment of the lecture. So the values developed by the United States are extremely attractive when you analyze them from a theoretical point of view. However, when you consider the historical evolution of the country and the most recent unfolding after the election of Donald Trump in 2016, you realize that the US does not always follow the principles and values it encourages. First, let's see how the US is a land of contradictions. So if we quickly discuss the following cartoon showing Donald Trump accusing the eagle on the Great Seal of the US of being an American for preaching cultural diversity. We understand that this cartoon condemns Trump's anti-immigration policy. So here Trump, as I said, is accusing the eagle on the Great American Seal of being an American because, as you can see, one from many, E pluribus unum, is written above the head of the eagle. So the US has a president who is presented as a fool, as an idiot, because Donald Trump does not comprehend the fundamental values of his own country. And Trump appears as very suspicious of everyone and everything. So this cartoon unveils the paranoia of the president in office, because Trump imagines that the US is constantly under attack and that enemies are everywhere, outside and inside the country as well. So the American eagle is considered as an enemy for defending the principle of multiculturalism in this cartoon. So we need to accept that the US is a land of contradictions, as explained by Barack Obama in his farewell speech in 2017. Remember, on line 20 and 21, Obama said, "For every 2 steps forward, we take 1 step back." So this sentence is crucial because it shows that each time there is an improvement in American society, it is followed by a regression or relapse. So each time there is an improvement in American society, it is followed by a regression or relapse. And the inconsistencies of the country, a country torn between democracy and injustice, freedom and restriction, so these inconsistencies were already exposed as early as 1858 by President Lincoln. So in 1858, Lincoln described the inherent fragility and division of the United States as such. A house divided against itself cannot stand. So this sentence seems to have foreshadowed the current political and social life of the US. Now, let's focus on the debate over Confederate statues and monuments which took place over the summer 2020. 2020 is a year with meaningful events illustrating the ongoing tensions between communities within the country. After the death of George Floyd on May the 25th, 2020, new waves of protest were triggered, and these protests crystallized the current racial tensions and the denunciation of police violence against black people. So while being arrested, George Floyd was held down by a police officer's knee for more than 8 minutes, and then he was pronounced dead shortly after. Another form of mobilization in response to Floyd's death was the removal of Confederate statues and monuments. So removal of these Confederate statues and monuments all over the US, because these statues were considered a source of social and racial division, and because they celebrated vestiges of racism or remains of racism. 2 stands are opposed in the debate, 2 stands over the value of these Confederate memorials. For some, the statues are a symbol of heritage, while for others, they are a symbol of hate because these monuments celebrate people who enslaved black people. In June 2020, President Trump promised to protect the Confederate monuments. Indeed, he declared that he would veto or block any bill trying to rename places named after the heroes of the Confederacy. Why doing so? Because for Trump, the Confederate monuments are benign symbols of American past, and they are not racist. They belong to history. On the contrary, or probably as a response, in July 2020, the House of Representatives approved legislation to remove statues honoring Confederate soldiers from the US Capitol in Washington, D.C., which means removing traces of racist heroes from an official building representing power. So most of these Confederate statues were built after the end of the Civil War. About 830 Confederate monuments were erected, and a majority was built during the years 1900s. So when the South accentuated racist, segregationist measures known as the Jim Crow laws, and most of these statues were sponsored or paid by a group named the United Daughters of the Confederacy. So the statues illustrate a strong American contradiction because they were used to reshape the Civil War history. How so? So reshaping Civil War history by constructing a positive myth of the racist Confederacy after it was defeated. And the goal of transforming the Confederacy into a positive myth was to preserve a sense of national unity at the end of the war. So the monuments can be seen as an attempt to erase reality, an attempt to make the horrible majestic in a political context when African Americans were granted more freedom and had to fight segregation. So the context was the context of the 14th Amendment, when they were given citizenship, the 15th Amendment, when they were given the right to vote. So they were granted more rights, and at the same time, they were trying to achieve political freedom and fight segregation. So the paradox lies in the fact that the monuments glorified the people who caused the Civil War, but also the same people who lost it. And the monuments don't criticize the action and values of the Southern pro-slavery society, whereas the country was supposed to become more democratic, more accepting, and more just regarding black people. In 2020, the major issue is the need to change American heritage without erasing American history. So, changing American heritage without erasing American history. The widespread removal of Confederate statues illustrate a drive to reinvent places of memories, places of memory in the South and in the US in general. So people started reclaiming and transforming the space the statue stood in because they want to create a new sense of history in public places. So people started reclaiming and transforming the space where you had the statue in order to create a new sense of history in public places. Let's take the example of the statue of General Lee on Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. So this is a bronze equestrian statue and it sat on an enormous pedestal on state property. And this gigantic statue was removed, and the space became a projection space for the local people to express their vision of a future ideally based on racial equality and the respect of minority. So the space where you had a celebration of the past is completely transformed and reappropriated by the local population. And as you can see on the pictures, it's a projection space for a new vision of the future, a future based on racial equality and the respect of minorities. The governor of Virginia, as well as the mayor of Richmond, supported the wish of the people to adopt a more realistic understanding of the past and the present. And Governor Northam, the governor of Virginia, even declared, "You see, in Virginia, we no longer preach a false version of history, one that pretends the Civil War was about state rights and not the evils of slavery. No one believes that any longer." So as a conclusion, we can say that these examples illustrate how the US can fail to guarantee equality, justice, and freedom to its citizens. So how the US failed to guarantee equality, justice, and freedom to its citizens, and cannot honor the value presented in the Declaration of Independence or in the US Constitution. The goal of this course is not to draw a negative portrayal of the United States, but to understand why it is a complicated country with many paradoxes. A country which is capable of great and inspiring achievements, as well as disappointing and retrograde policies. So the next lectures will also show that the country is both divided and united, divided geographically, politically, culturally, racially, also divided on gender issues, but united in the desire to live along the principles we have discussed today. Thank you.